Hello, hello, comrades and relatives. Welcome back to the Red Nation Podcast. I'm Jen Marley. Today we are joined by two very special guests whom I love very much to talk about love. Um, we've got Levi Harter, Oglala Lakota, awesome Indigenous educator. And we've also got our comrade Maira. Um, she has rolled with us for many of our delegations. She's a wonderful translator and is always teaching me so much. So, would you two like to introduce yourselves?
Hi, everybody. My name is Mayra. I am originally born in Panama from Mexico. I have a tribalized persona from Mexico, and I feel very much honored to be here, as always, with comrades and very much in love.
Hamatakiapi, Levi Harter Machiapi. Hello, relatives. Hi, Jen. Hey, Mara. My name is Levi Harter. As Jen said, I'm Oglala Lakota. I grew up north of St. Louis, on the Illinois side of the river, small rural hometown. Back and forth between there and Hot Springs and Pine Ridge and Buffalo Gap in South Dakota growing up, where my dad's from during summer times. And yeah, I'm living in Seattle, Washington. I'm an educator within Seattle Public School Districts. Yeah, and I'm super honored. Thank you for having me out, and I'm really looking forward to this. So yeah, just want to say thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us, comrades. So, which one of you started out our preliminary conversation saying Valentine's Day sucks?
It literally could have been any of us.
Right. And it does, right? Like,
Yeah.
people struggle on this day, and it's sad because it's like it's this capitalist holiday that really makes a lot of people, it kind of forces us to reckon with how love has been so very distorted. It puts pressure on people. It makes people feel inadequate. And that's why we love starting out our Valentine's Day episodes by taking the focus off all of that and remembering our brave Kanaka relatives who on this day murdered the infamous bloodthirsty colonizer Captain Cook. So shout out to our Kanaka relatives. Ow!
Yeah,
Today is their victory.
yeah.
I'm thinking
Thank you for that.
about the annexation of the Kingdom of Hawaii. I'm thinking about their ongoing struggles. I'm thinking about uh, you know, saving Red Hill. I'm thinking about the pollution that the military continues to carry out on the islands. I'm thinking about climate change and disaster. I'm thinking about the recovery of Maui after the fire this past year. So um, there's many things to think about on this day when we're thinking about love and what love means. So that's what we're going to get into in this episode. And the first question that we were kind of playing with is like, it is very silly. What is love? What is love?
Not
Um,
what is love.
what is possible with our current material conditions? How is love able to manifest or not manifest? I often feel like capitalism, all the isms, all the archies have robbed us of sincere ways of loving that we know are prominent in all of our cultures at one time because of the stories we have. Um, many of us have certain types of kinship modes still intact. I think about, Pueblo life for me and that expression of love. So, like, let's get into it. What is love today? What is possible within our current material conditions? How is love distorted under capitalism? You guys chime in.
I think love, being an interpreter and translator for a living, we always have like this intimate reading of language, and love can be pretty much, to me, any act of support for each other, or any relationship that has to do with support one another, because we're not alone. Like, we can't be without love in that way. But love nowadays, it seems to be more of a commodity, when it comes to how it is expressed, how it is defined. And it turns out precisely to go against everything that would be this deep relationality amongst each other, this deep understanding, because it's read as pleasure, or is read as, when all is good, when happiness arrives, as this like continuum, right? um, so people are looking for their other half. They're looking for that um, moment where they will finally get there, instead of it being a series of moments and a series of instances where you show that love for one another, where it is hard and difficult and painful, but you're showing up and you're creating that relationship. So I think, if anything, and I know it can be very cliche, but love is revolutionary in that way, because it's basically going nowadays against everything that we have been taught that love should express, or love should be materialized as. And kind of like how some authors that we all love and share have said, it has to do with how you are taught love in your childhood. You see it first there, and so you tend to enact it that way and feel it that way and understand it that way. So it's also healing, right? Healing that, because we're not all coming from a place necessarily of love. So but I'll just leave it there for now. Yeah.
That just has me thinking, especially how we opened up, like I mentioned in our Kanaka Maoli, where this time of year is actually one that I really like. Um, Not because of necessarily like Valentine's Day, but like, so it's like Black History Month. And so the first week of, like, as an educator, I usually do a lot of stuff on like Black Indians, Black histories, Black Native kinship. And then it leads into, in the middle of the month, like I get to talk about like Captain Cook Death Day. Um, so I'm looking forward, like, I always look forward to that, and kind of like, I just think about like what, like, and not to bring up the old reliable, but like what John Trudell says about how love got messed up in a lot of ways, how ultimately, like, and when this is like his Tribes of Europe speech, where he talks about when there was the conquering and when there was the Christianizing of that continent and those peoples over there, they essentially had to learn to love what they feared, which was there to possess them, which was there to, like, to possess the souls of the godless heathens. Like, he talks a lot about that, and he talks about how it like messed love up in a lot of ways, and how even now, when we think about like what it means to love, and we mentioned bell hooks a little bit in the prelim conversation, and I know, I think sure she'll come up again, but you know just, it does get centered on like romantic love, and which, I mean, I'm a sucker for romance, like I won't lie, like I am somebody who does desire that in my life. But I do get super annoyed with the hyper focus on it, and like the hyper focus on the couple as the ultimate expression of love, as the ultimate goal for people to replicate. I mean, like the Hallmark movies, the amount of Hallmark movies that come out not only around like Valentine's, but like Christmas time, like any other, like Thanksgiving, like the couple centric ideas that are pushed, that and it's not just Hallmark movies, it's just media in general, that's always pushing this idea of, when we think about love, and this is something that I talk about with my students when we talk about the word relationship, or relationship, or like all my relations, or like relationality, like, because when I use the word relationship, I always ask them, I say, what do you think of when you think of this word? And undoubtedly every one of them has this connection to, like, oh well, a relationship is like a partner, a boyfriend or a girlfriend, right? So even like in our youth, they have this, there's this connection between relationship, and it's like, okay, well, let's expand that a little bit. Like, what are relationships that you have that aren't just, are these the only relationships you have? And then we start talking about friendships, people we go to school with, and eventually, like, we're able to extend that to lands, we're able to extend that to waters, we're able to extend that to non-human relatives, plant, animals. And then I even talk about like the invisible ones. That's how I use it with my kids, because we have kids from all over. So yeah, I guess just thinking like what is love? Like it's definitely a lot more than like the typical, like I don't know, just like what we see on Valentine's Day, you know?
Absolutely. Thank you both for that insight. And the place you left us off, Levi, we were talking in our preliminary conversation about reciprocity for the earth as a high expression of love, right? That's like at the core of most of our, cultures and, spiritualities, ways of life, right? Um, it's based on understanding deeply our relationships with the earth and non-human relatives so that we can maintain balance, so that we can maintain right relations. And again, when we're saying things like this, people assume we're going to like a hokey metaphorical place, but we're being quite literal, right? Talking about maintaining the land. What does it take to keep our ecosystems healthy? What does it take to keep our animal populations healthy? What does it take to ensure that if we are living off the earth, that the earth is able to sustain us, right? It's very simple things like this. And so um kind of thinking about love being extended to non-human relatives of this earth and otherwise too, right? um I think that's where my mind is at a lot of the time. And I think in these relationships, we see that very rarely is love between just two people. And one thing that I'm asking myself is like, can love ever really only be between two people? Even a partnership, a couple, right, is backed by an entire kinship network. And um, the power that they hold affects everyone in their life. It affects entire networks of kinship. And so, we cannot afford to be individualist in our approach to love and relationships. And this is why I'm like increasingly critical of the quote unquote casual relationship, because I'm like, be so real about what that means. If it means low effort, if it means not serious, if it means you don't want to deal with the heaviness and the hard stuff and the things that weigh heavy on the heart, then straight up say that, and don't try to put it in the category of like this life affirming love that our communities need to survive. And I was wondering if y'all had any more thoughts on that before we move on to the next topic.
That's beautiful. Yeah, if I may, so I'm thinking of two things as you were speaking. Um, there's this like understanding in Tolteca traditions from down here in Anahuac and further down into Central America that humans don't really play an important part in creation. So I think a lot of what love entails is positionality. So nowadays we have this capitalist way of looking at humans as the center of a universe, right? Which also is very limited. Saying universe, it should be a pluriverse. And I think a lot of the issues that we're facing have to do with precisely understanding life and love as human, um, and and therefore anthropocentrically, or like we are the ones, right? And I think Tolteca traditions hold this notion of floricanto. It's called in Xochimilcuicat, which is we are animals, but we're not very powerful. We can't protect much. We don't have uh, teeth that can cut through skin, and so like there's always this like comparison of humans versus a jaguar, or versus the eagle, or versus any other animal. And we're the small ones, we're the little ones, we're the ones that can't really do much. And in this Tolteca tradition, that all we really come to do is floricanto, which could be translated as praising creation and dancing and offering to creation. And I've always understood love like that. When you are giving more than you're taking, or at least you're understanding that you're taking, is because you are aware of your actions to give in order to be here. And so dance, ceremony, spirituality, songs, all that is part of our only real contribution to life as humans, in thinking of ourselves as small and the youngest of all creations. And I've always liked that, because I think that's one of the most pernicious things about Western way of thought, is you know thinking us humans as able to control all the narrative and all the forces of nature, when we're definitely not here for long. And all we really have is the capacity to relate to each other. So I was thinking about that as you were speaking, because we do need each other to survive, and we need other more than human energies to allow us to survive. So I think I think love is that reciprocity of never really taking more than what you need, and definitely never taking to hurt or harm. And that entails a certain level of balance, which is what you were talking about. But yeah.
Wow, that's see, this is why I like talking about stuff like this. This is why I like talking about love and stuff. Dang. I'm not gonna lie, I was a bit lost in the beginning of what you were talking about, and then as you started getting to like us being, I guess when you were talking about us being small, I was like I was really that was hard for me to hear because I was like, well, we are small and like, but I guess the thing I was hearing is like, well, we aren't, and we can do things to like save the earth, and that's where I was going. But then as I heard you talking about like, like our role in like just like dancing and praising and like, yeah, we don't. And even like, I guess I'm thinking in like, Lakota like worldview, or just, the ways that we have, it's like, you're right. Like we don't create a whole lot. Like it's, and kind of the when we started creating things like with the industrialization and with the overtaking and the overconsumption and the overbuilding, that's like when things started getting really ugly. Like, this land was beautiful. Like this land, what is like here, like what we call like Turtle Island, or like, North America, South America, like even if as we're talking about like the geography of the United States, it's so diverse. It's so like there's swamps, there's desert, there's mountains, there's prairies, there's plains, there's rainforests, there's, massive woods. It's just like these places are so beautiful. And when people started to not to like quit giving and quit being like what we call stewards, or what we call like caretakers, like that is when things started, like, and like it just breaks my heart, like, and it is like, and I guess when we talk about like love, we also have to talk about like the heartbreak. And like, because like it looks like a parking lot now, like, like that George Carlin bit, like they took this beautiful land and like made it into one big shopping mall. And that's really, it is hard to think about, but yeah, I also, I was thinking a lot about what Jen had said about like the material, like what is love, like, first of all, like in order to even participate in what we're taught is like love in terms of Valentine's Day, in terms of romantic pursuit or partnership, like it takes a lot of money. Like it takes a lot of money to sweep someone off their feet, so to speak, or it takes a lot of like access to resources and a lot of time and a lot of like, I'm somebody who's a parent. So for me to be able to think about, what would it look like if I were to replicate, or if I were to try to show interest in somebody in that way, that would take a lot of time away, like from the things that I'm trying to do, and we know why, we know why that the ways that we show love as communities, as like Indian peoples, as like people who are into organizing and like communal care. Like we know why they don't make movies about us, because maybe one, it wouldn't be able to capture like the depth and the breadth of the type of love that we have for each other and that we have for our lands. Um, and two, it's just like really, it's really beautiful. Like if everybody saw what we were doing and everybody saw the beauty and taking care of relationships to these lands, they would be mad and they would be, and maybe this kind of gets into, um, kind of what Maira was talking about in the prelim conversation about like you have to hate for love. Like we have to hate capitalism, like we have to hate colonialism, we have to hate white supremacy in order and love our people in order to stand up and like make those changes and to say no more. Like anger can come from a righteous place, like hate can come from a righteous place, like love can come from a righteous place. So um no, I thank you for that, Maida. Yeah, that was that was a lot to chew on, honestly.
Yes, we're already getting into the thick of it. Thank you both so much. I'm already in my feels. And as you were talking, Levi, I was thinking about the the term y'all Lakotas have for white people, right? The fat taker. And I remember you telling me this story. That term in itself implies that inherent to the colonizer's nature is their lack of care, their lack of desire to share, because that term fat taker refers to the fact that animal fat was reserved for elderly, children, and those who were sick because it's the most nourishing part of the animal. And when a white person was invited in to share and partake with y'all, he took all the fat for himself. Do you want to expand on that story? And please correct me if I'm wrong. Like,
Yeah. So there's a couple things I've heard about. Like, yes, like washichu is uh like it means to take fat, and like what you had said is pretty correct. So one of the stories um that I have heard is like it wasn't even actually one white guy, it was like two or three. And like you said, yeah, we reserve that part for as like an honor, and it'd usually go around in like a bowl or something and be passed around. Like, so if there's someone sick or there's elderly or children, or maybe if we had a special guest, like, because we know like Indians love to feed people, like Indians are so welcoming, like, and upon the first time meeting these peoples, yeah, there was, this like, oh, let's bring them into our home. Like, let's feed them, let's take care of them, let's see what this relation could be like. And yeah, so like the way that I heard it is like when it went to the first white guy, like, and you have this bowl of fat, and sometimes it's not a lot, but sometimes it is. He took like half of it and then he passed it to the next dude. Um, and he took the remaining half. And then when it got to the third white guy, there wasn't even enough for him, right? And sometimes the story is told like the first white guy takes most of it, and then the second white guy gets like a little bit, and the third white guy gets nothing. And then what is normally meant to like go around to everybody, like doesn't even make it, like they don't even feed their own people. Like, and I think about um man, I can't remember if this is like in Black Elk Speaks or if it's from one of the times that we first sent a delegate to the to DC, where they were like watching, um, they went to visit and they saw, like, we're being told like the Great White Father is going to take care of you. The Great White Father is super rich, and we're going to take care of you. And so we went there to DC, and you just see like people on the street, and you see like people like being paid to sweep, and like the way he had said it is like some people have more than they could ever use, and like there's people who have nothing. Like it's a very Lakota thing to be like, if one of us is hungry, it's because we're all hungry. If one of us is eating good, it's because we're all eating good. Like that idea, like if one of us is cold, it's because we're all cold. Like we're doing it together, whether we're rich or whether we're poor. Um, and he's like, I see the ways that y'all do it. I see the ways that like the Great White Father told us it would be. Like, surely this can't be better than the ways of my people. Like that's the famous quote, the way that it goes. Um, but also in terms of like the term washichu, I've also heard like another thing is like when the French would bring, um, like when the, because it was like the French we met first. And this is kind of one that like hypes up white people. So I'm really like, I need to say that when I tell this, but uh, when we met them, they had things that we had never seen before, metals, just all these different tools and resources that we had never seen. So some people say that when we met them, and we traded with them, like the bundles we got were washichun, because like we have this word that's washichun, like nasal N, and there's like spiritual concepts and components tied to it, but like it also means like a bundle, right? So there was this idea, and this is why like I'm really hypocritical of like non or really hypercritical of like white people's learning the language and white people's like trying to like do a lot of language work, because the way that I read it online, because I actually wrote about this word in undergrad, but when I was doing research online, they said that we started referring to white people as washichun, as like people who had bundles, like people who had things that we hadn't had before. And um, it was only after meeting them and getting to know them and dropping this relationship that we dropped the nasal N to just washichu, because it's like a very tongue in cheek. Um, we know a lot of our languages are very like tongue in cheek, like you can change a single word and it means uh, something different, or a single inflection. But yeah, I'm glad you brought that one up. But yeah, it's just like when I read that story online, it just made people out to be like, oh, because there's also a spiritual and a sacred connotation to the word washichun. So like when I read it online as I was doing research for this thing that I wrote in undergrad, there was just like white people being like, "Oh yeah, they called us washichun because we were sacred and because we were like holy and because we brought them sacred gifts." And I'm just like, "Yo," I'm like, "That's not what I heard." That because the first story I heard is the one that you were talking about and recounted about them like taking and not splitting it up. But yeah, I, yeah, but that's what I think about. Yeah, because they don't. It's just greediness. It's greediness, and like being greedy is an absence of love. Like the most greedy in this planet, like when we talk about like the rich or the wealthy or the Black Rocks or the Wells Fargos, that's not love. Like those people don't have love. Like it's actually been shown that the hyper rich are losing the ability to detect emotion in people's faces, um, because their interactions are transactional. Their interactions are, so they're literally not able to read the micro expressions that come with just like being a human.
Talk about literal dehumanization. My goodness. Like, and that's what Fanon teaches us. The colonizer is not more human because he's has the power. They participate in an active process of dehumanizing themselves, right? Except they see it as progress. Did you want to add to this conversation, Maida?
Yeah, I was thinking of Palestine, thinking of the machine that dehumanizes in order to pursue, whatever extractivism is at hand, and the business of war. So I was also thinking about that when it comes to like the love for the land, the love for your culture and your ways of life, um, in, as part of what we need to understand what is going on. Um, that what's happening to Palestine is happening to us. But at the same time, also understanding the gravity and how we could not really understand completely because we're not there. But uh, I mean it in the way of how love can also be a big, um, the big conundrum of our lifetimes when we individualize it or when we think about it as something for you to find and make sure that you in this lifetime find your other half, and this whole notion of romantic love, um, whereas love is in the very small things and the very everyday things. It's not this big um, important moment of your life. And it also made me think about all the institutions around love that capitalism have produced, or this idea that marriage has anything to do with love, for example. And when we look at the origins of that institution, how it was pretty much so that women could not hold property, could not have power, not even, you know, relationship with their own children, so that kind of kidnapping of the emotionality that our relationships are is what is the most egregious and the most murderous of it all. um, thinking about, again, Palestine is also thinking about all the relationships that are being dehumanized in the context of occupation, and in that way, indigenous peoples of the world and their relationship to the land and their relationship to each other hold that very principle of reciprocity and solidarity and commonality that is not in the equation of capitalism. So the more atomized and individual we become in the way we love, the less powerful community is, and the smaller it gets, and therefore the weaker we become in our acts of love, in our power to love. So I think of always about how necessary it is to deconstruct romantic love as the only expression of love that we can achieve or aspire to, and rather this other kind of love, which is not very, you know, it's not as seductive, or at least it's never like easy, and which is, to show up for each other in the worst of times. For example, now to hold hope for Palestine. That's love, because it's hard, because it's very hard right now to think about it and to enact it. And so is that love that pushes you to go to a direct action, but at the same time is that one that keeps you hopeful and joyful with the ones around you and the people you love. So yeah, I was thinking about that too.
I think everyone in the world who is thinking about love or questioning love or doubting love should look to Palestine. So many people are already so moved by what they're seeing coming out of not the genocide itself, but people's resistance to it, right? And so many of our Palestinian comrades remind us, like, they love us until we're fighting back. They only love us when we're perfect victims, right? But the truest form of love that they show us is that resistance, is quite literally physically fighting for your people to exist, right? And we're called hateful for it, and we're called terrorists for it. And so if that's terrorism, if that high and profound form of love is what an entity like the United States calls that, then what is their definition of love? And we know what it is, and we know that it's worthless. So why on earth are we letting these institutions like the United States set the terms for what love is, or what hate is, or what evil is, right? We can't live like that. We simply cannot. And this, kind of brings up this something that I think about a lot, is that we are conditioned to understand love right now as being it's based on insecurity, right? It's based on feelings of inadequacy. Many times people don't consider love to be legitimate unless there is an element of jealousy or possession, right? Love itself has been turned into a property relation. And like, proletarian feminists have been saying this and talking in depth about this for a very long time. This is not a new concept, and it's unfortunate to me that I don't see it talked about more. And
Because it needs to
so,
be talked about more.
yeah, like, and really, I think Red Nation needs to talk about it more, to be so real. As our relationships are ever shifting and fluid, as we enter some very difficult times. We've got to be very, very critical about the moments when we are centering our pain and our guilt, or maybe our pleasure and our comfort, over the broader fight, right? And I get it. We're human. We are not immune to propaganda. We are not totally, fortified against the world that we face every day. But let's be real. Like, let's be real about the consequences of letting that insecurity or that guilt or that hyper individualism overcome us. And like you, Levi, I'm very much a sucker for romantic love as well. I'm TRN's in-house hopeless romantic. And so this is why I think about this so much. Think about it. I think about it every single day in relation to the political work, in relation to how we keep ourselves strong and hopeful, and how we keep, the fire inside us alive. I've been thinking very deeply, specifically these past few days, about the importance of self-love and how we reach that without buying into individualism, or selfishness. And so, um, how do we parse through our conceptions, our love, and our deeply embedded like insecurities? And how do we try to like weave ourselves out of like the cocoon of guilt that our conceptions of love are like mostly shrouded in?
It's a good one. I don't know. I I think about John Trudell a lot because I think he was like the first time, because he talks about it as like those insecure behavior patterns and like as those things. Because that was the first time I think I heard an Indian talk about love, like other than like like our love songs or our love stories, like outside of like Lakota stuff. But I'm thinking a lot about what something Myra had said. It was like the idea of looking for love, like the idea that like we're searching for this love, and then when you started talking about like Palestine, it's like it's all around us, like love, like if we like it's literally all around us, like not to be like, I think that might be a movie title or something like that, but it is like we can look to so many different fronts. We could look to like the Kanaka Maoli and their fight against Cook, or their fight for Red Hill, or like we could look to, there's so many places, like, and especially when we talk about like indigenous peoples protecting a majority of biodiversity like around the world, like it's all around us, like open your eyes, like wake up, but um yeah, like the idea that we're looking for love, and then because I was taking notes, like that love is taking action, and even sometimes like violence. Something that I had thought about is like we all hear stories of like people or relationships or friends or maybe even ourselves, we've been in a like a romantic partnership or something, and like in what we call love, like we have like hurt each other, or we've like things have not worked out. And I think there's a lot of reasonings for that, but it's like I know people who have destroyed themselves and hurt others in the name of love, right? It's like, and when you were talking about like what's United States definition of love, like possessiveness, ownership, like we replicate that. Like we've been colonized, we have been taught those things. So we were talking about like it's not about as much as like learning what love is, it's about unlearning. And it's not as much, like I tell my students this too. It's like it's not about learning what it means to be human, or learning how to be Indian, or learning what it means to be like, I have kids who are Blackfoot, I have kids who are Pueblo, I have kids who are Potawatomi. It's not as much about learning what it means to be that, but just remembering. And in order for us to remember, like we do have to unlearn, like we have to unlearn these insecure behavior patterns. We have to unlearn and like and sit down. Like I do agree like with the self-love piece, and I have such a tumultuous relationship with the term self-love and like the concept of it right now, because as like a parent, like like I can self-love, and I can get really good at drawing baths, and I can get really good at, like, taking care of myself and doing what I need, but I also need tremendous communal support. Like, we cannot parent on our own. We cannot, like, and in the same way, like, I can love, yeah, yeah, like, I can love myself, but I also need the love of my relatives, and I also need to be able to express that with my relatives. So, like, not to knock on COVID's door too heavily and talk about, like, the lockdown and what that did, like, I think that messed up, like, love in a lot of ways. Like, when we got isolated, when we got put into, these small, and the units that we had were tested and were tried. And I know a lot of people that came out like really hurt from that. I don't know if I know anybody who came out stronger. I'm sure there's rhetoric of that. I'm sure there's people who are like, "Oh yeah, we weathered COVID, and um, like, it made me and my partner, or made my family or my unit stronger." And it's like, I don't know if I believe them, or if I do, it's just like, you're not in the same struggle that, like, my relatives are, like, you know. Um, but yeah, I just think a lot about the love that, like, moves us to take action, the love that moves us. Like, I've been so appreciative of a friend who has, like, brought me food. Like, I had a relative who was able to give me a ride. Like, I had a relative who was able to come and cook for my family, and that was tremendous. That like, the little things like that, um, you know, and that's not romantic. Like, that's not, you know, and I am a sucker that, like, I love romance. I do want romance in my life. I don't think that it's like I don't think that it's like revolutionary or anything like that, but I do think that, like, what we call romance, and maybe this is where we can kind of start, like, deconstructing, like, that word and, like, its ties to, like, Romanesque, like, romance, like, the Roman influences. Uh, but yeah, I have a friend who actually, she might be on the upcoming Mika. Um, she had just shared a post about, just like, yeah, it's just like, under capitalism, like, it is actually, like, it's super easy for certain people to practice that romance, and it's super hard for other people to be able to have that, like, especially as parents, like, the ability to have a date night as a parent, like, like, that's crazy. Like, that is, like, it can be hard, it can be a struggle, and it's something that I very much try to cultivate and try to make sure that I have in my life. But a lot of people don't, you know.
Yeah, that makes me think of a lot of the drama around love, that for example in Mexican culture, like all these, songs about devotion and, complete, you know handing your life to the person that you love, that whole like scheme, of always be in that position of letting the other one step all over you because of love, and if it doesn't hurt like that, it's not love. Or and I sometimes think about it too, like I try to be critical about how much that again takes away our own power, or at least it doesn't allow us to see love as power, but power in a good way, but rather what draws today to love has more to do with this aesthetic, and in that way the aesthetic of how power can be exerted upon someone through the means of love, or through the means of being chosen. That's another tricky one, right? Like a lot of this discourse about self-love, and the fashion of this really fashionable thing about coaching and loving yourself, and know how to be chosen and all that stuff. Like, to me it just seems incredibly narcissistic and incredibly detached from what really, if we really try to look down inside what gives us passion, like and I don't know, it's almost like, and this is where I draw the connection between revolution and love, because um you ought to love uh, the other one and the other one's freedom so much as you love your own. So it's more about serving each other. Love is more about an ethic of service. Um, so a good teacher or a good person that loves you wants to empower you, wants to give you everything you need that they have learned, so that you can continue. um so it's not this love that devastates you or leaves you in the corner if you're not chosen. It's rather this love for social justice and social struggle, like, and that could be just as passionate, like, that's another thing. It's like, um it's good to feel passion about going out there and putting yourself out there for others. um just as it is important for you to put yourself out there for the person you love. But sometimes it's just not valued like that, right? Like it's almost like it has to look in a particular way for it to be love, or it has to cost you a particular price for it to be love. And and I to me, just I just feel like we just need sometimes to just realize that love is about being vulnerable and knowing that you're vulnerable, and you need each other. And what what one can tell or cannot tell, the other one will. And in that way, it is about community. It is about um, struggling through the different takes on life, but in community. So that's why romantic love can be very much a dangerous way of looking at love, it, because it disempowers you. And again, when we were talking about that, um, also as parents, like how you live by what you're saying, like, um, I don't think, and I don't mean to romanticize the past, but when kids were the parenting or the mothering of children was shared, there was more time for everybody, because everybody had that responsibility towards them. But when you just leave it up to the mother, who at the same time has to be, you know, love herself and empower herself and, be a superwoman, like, uh, it's impossible. Just like it's impossible for you to demand that from your partner being everything to you, you know? So it kind of like just leaves us alone and shattered and disconnected, when mothering is not about a partnership. It's about a community. And all your aunties are your mothers too, in just in different takes of life, so like I feel like that's why romantic love is a weapon of capitalism to make us smaller entities that could easily be broken, that can easily be taken down and erased. But when you're a community, when you're a bunch of you, it's harder. And when all of those love each other,
Is
it's
that
even
a
harder.
is that a
So
potential episode title? What was that? Romantic love is a weapon of capitalism. That was sick. That was so hard,
I
Maida.
think so. I'm writing down timestamps for this right now. Um, yeah, because this is the core of the episode.
That was that was so. And I guess yeah, I do want to get into. I don't want to say it for the third time that I'm a romantic, but because I do want to get away from that idea of like romanticism, and like we talked about this in the prelim, like we don't want to romanticize the past, like, and also the ways that we have, like, as Indian peoples have been romanticized. And then when I was telling you, Jen, about, you were talking about like, where does that word come from, like where does like romance come from, like it comes from like this is my Roman Empire, this is the fall of my Roman Empire. Like it comes from that,
It literally comes from the Roman Empire. Like,
literally.
and it's the basis of the aesthetics of the United States. And in that way, that's why romance is reduced to pretty much purely aesthetics, right? And how we understand it.
Well, that's yeah. So like, and that's why I was like, it's even more gross now when I think about people romanticizing us as Indians, because like what that like that's not love. Like in the same way that um in the same way that Columbus and they all came and they're like, "Oh, like you're not human beings, like you're Indians or you're this or that." It's like that same thing that those who are dehumanized will dehumanize others, right? Those who are loveless will not see our love and not see our struggles. And that is why, kind of tie back into what we were talking about earlier, that's why some of the things that I think about, and that I want to teach about, and when I think about my students, um I want to talk about the revolutions. I want to show them these things because if we are portrayed in media or school curriculum, it very is seldomly talking about our resistance. I don't even know how much the Indian Wars, of the plains of the Indian Wars up here in the Pacific Northwest, are taught in public schools. But if we are mentioned, we're romanticized. Um, we're mythologized. We're like relics of the past. We don't really exist. We're not really here. And so that's why, when I do stuff with my students, um, I want to show them the fierceness that is our people. And it's not to try to portray us as this warrior stereotype, but we are though, and we are a fiercely like and it's not because we're fierce or we're savage or we're violent. It's because we love. It's because we love lands. It's because we love each other. It's because we have this deep love that they will construe as hate for them. And to be honest, you have to allow the humanness of hate. So when we think about Palestine and things like that, and the amount of love that these people have, and the generosity that the Palestinians, and it's they I don't want to exemplify them or try to pedestalize or to detract anything, but it's there is so much that they are teaching the world right now. If only people would look. People are looking for love, that idea. It's we really have to look right there. We have these stories, we have these lineages, we have like I interviewed Kylie the other day for something I was doing on indigeneity. And she said something towards the end about what indigeneity is, um and is not, and she I'm literally just, let me pull this up here real quick. She said something about we have such gen like beautiful, wonderful, intelligent, creative people in our lineages. Um I don't think of indigeneity as a spectacle, meaning it's not for the consumption of settlers. Our love is not for consumption. It's also not for the consumption in terms of tourism or any sort of settler fantasy or curiosity. And she said, I don't think of it as a caricature. And keeping that in mind, indigeneity is a very political identity. It's attached to a long history of resistance, and we need to be taken seriously because we do have like we have a lot of love in our communities. We have a lot of creativity. We have a lot of just brilliant, brilliant people.
Oh, absolutely, Levi. Um, just going back to that appreciation, I think people kind of miss how much love is in their life. And I am very guilty of this myself because when you spend so much time longing for that romantic love that, we're all taught to chase, that really does not exist. Let's be, it just doesn't. And a lot of people learn that the hard way. And sometimes it literally takes their whole soul to the point that they straight up stop believing in it. They, the capacity to love, no matter how heavy and difficult it is, that shows that you're human. And Maida, you were talking about the coaching you see, right? I am very fascinated by the Shira 7 phenomena, right? Um, right? For
The
those of you who
the
know
what
her,
phenomenon?
the Shira 7 phenomenon, she's the woman on all the social medias. From what I understand, her videos were first salvage from YouTube. She used to be a vlogger. She's still around, and she essentially gives glorified gold digging advice. But it's very sad because the perspective she comes from is she frames it as feminist, she frames it as an empowerment, getting your power back for men. But really she advocates for is seeing men as not being capable of love. She says men are not capable of love, only women and children are. She says love is between women and children. And she says we cannot treat men as if they are capable of love. She essentially is spouting the same rhetoric as the red pilled right wing guys, but she's packaging it for women of color. And she's pushing, the nuclear family. She's teaching you how to belittle yourself and curate yourself so that a man can care for you financially for life, right? Essentially selling your time, labor, soul for room and board, and her logic is also like, really reinforces this idea that every woman is for sale. And when men believe that every woman is for sale, um, well, we know what happens. And so uh, it's getting popular amongst, again, she's targeting young Black and brown women. And it is essentially just a repackaging of the most key aspects of heteropatriarchy and what relationships look like under capitalism and white supremacy, and saying this is the only way you're going to be able to live empowered and with dignity with a man, because men are not capable of love and do not ever expect to be loved by a man. And to love a man is to be weak, right? That's what she said. That's what she teaches people. And again, she's framing it as empowerment, she's framing it as self love, she's framing it as feminism, and it's becoming profoundly and disturbingly popular. And I'm not surprised because it's a direct response to our material conditions, right? Women in my generation and younger in mass are choosing things like long term celibacy, are swearing off men. They no longer believe that it is possible to be in a loving and healthy relationship with men, because they believe that, and this is true, right? It's something I believe, most men are not capable of seeing most women as human. I think this is a true and real product of our reality, right? Living under these structures. However, just accepting that like men are fucking animals and completely dehumanizing them and therefore yourself is not the solution. I think that accepting that capitalism is just an unchanging thing that we can't do anything about is not the solution. I even heard somebody try to say that Sheer Seven is making a class critique in saying that women don't have the possibilities for upward mobility. Therefore, she's encouraging women to gain some kind of financial power and therefore taking back some of their power in society. And it's disturbing because she does not put forth the class critique at all. She does not care about poor people. She does
Yeah,
not care about revolutions.
I was gonna say, because does it extend, like, does is her audience, do you think, is that like strictly for like the imperial core?
Yeah. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. She's not talking about the global south. She doesn't talk about liberation for anyone. She talks about the self. She talks about getting financial security and stability for yourself. It's the highest form of individualism, the highest form of individualism. And she repeatedly doubles down and says again, this is not love. If you're looking for love, I'm not the person to come to. And she straight up just asserts and doubles down that love is not possible with a man. Like, and I'm like, to lose hope like that, to lose the essence of that, of love and your capability to love as a human being, that is a kind of death of the spirit, a type of even
Yeah,
social death that
I
I
was gonna
know
say,
I certainly could not live with.
would you say that would you say that she's like she is giving up on love, and that she is telling people that, so like essentially she's like training herself or others to tolerate a man or to have a man to provide financially, and that it is not about love, which I guess there's some aspects of like you don't have to be in love to have good partnerships and to even have like good like families, you know, like I'm talking about like romantic love, but like a total absence of love, especially in like the context of what we've been talking about. Like, so she's advocating that essentially what is it sounds like a business relationship. Like it sounds like business advice.
Exactly. Exactly. I agree. Yeah, because it's almost like tending to the symptoms and not the structure or the real origin of the problem. Because, okay, so I give up on men, I give up on love, I give up on everything, and I'll just survive. Uh, and so my question is like, how long can you feel that without it becoming a complete catastrophe for you and everybody around you? Because it's finite. This planet is finite, resources are finite, and next thing you know, you just are running over everybody in order to keep yourself, you know? That, I think individuation is probably what's most against the feeling of love and solidarity and reciprocity, because it stops trying to integrate. So it's kind of like how, you know, how United States has these policies like on immigrants and refugees, where and this is a lot what we were talking about, also about philanthropy and philanthropic capitalism as the only way to love. So you only care about the other through giving them money, or if you go to a charity and do that, that's how you love the other one, which is also comes from a lot of, you know, of these Christian notions of um, giving for the person next to your neighbor, right? Like so this Christian reciprocity in a way, like, oh, I'm a caring person, so I go to church. You know, and no offense, I'm not against anybody's church, but I'm thinking like, why do you have to go through the church? Or, you know, sometimes, exactly, like you have to use that institution, sort of, kind of, you know, how in today's age of social media we have to go through our computers to say I like or I love, instead of showing up and looking at each other's and know by looking at each other that we love each other, you know. We Which is something that's really sad for, and I see it as a parent. um, uh, these generations are not necessarily capable of have this encounter that is body, that is bearing, you know, disappointment in somebody's eyes, you know, when they're disappointed of you. um it's that vulnerability of facing the relationship, you know, with your body, with all your being, is integrating all that. So it love can also be incredibly hard and incredibly sad. You could be disregarded, you know, and you have all this love to give. So I'm just thinking in terms of like how that is part of the structure. And the US, for example, in their policies with immigrants or refugees, is like they're kind of integrated citizens, right? But there's always that, you know, they're always aliens. There's always not, they're not really us. So we'll just tolerate them, you know? So there isn't this false narrative of the United States as this nation of pluralism and welcoming and all that, which is how the United States portrays themselves out, you know, from outside of its own prison borders. Um, you know, it's part of that understanding that you are never truly integrated. You know, the solidarity um, as mercy, as a token, like, oh, I'll be nice to you, you know, and that's exactly not what love is, according to people like Che Guevara. You know, like he, for example, his passion for revolutionary thought was not because of thought in itself, but because he loved his people, you know. So like, you can only strike for that revolution if you love completely and passionately. You love each other. So not this half love, you know, and definitely not that what you were talking about with this lady and all this, you know, coaching, that it's, to me, it's just another business, and it has a lot to do with this media, you know, with this technology that partializes everything and fragments it, so that you can get a little bit of life through it, through the screens, and you don't have to put yourself out there and be vulnerable with other, you know. It's more about, oh, I have all this wisdom from listening to people, but what about actually experiencing it, you know? What about actually have these difficult conversations with people? That's love. That's having a, you know, an ethics of service, of putting yourself out there for that conversation to happen and feel it. And so I think it's a lot of about demonizing feelings as well, as it's bad, like, or you're limited, you're primitive. You know, and we're not, you know, we need that touch, and we need to feel, and so like, uh there is there's nothing there's nothing bad about, uh um, you know, the emotion of love, you know, being it bad, being sad, being everything. It's That's love too. You know, crying is love too. Grief, it shows that you care. And so like, it's not a weakness to care. It's actually, it takes a lot to care. And so I think it's just a way to bypass all that, so that we get into this realm of buying and you know, getting your fix. So it's like this notion of love as an addiction. That's kind of how I see it in capitalism. Like, oh, you just go get your next fix, or, you know, oh, this is the new thing, the new answer. You know, the new, so like, it's endless. It's liberalism right there. And it never really solves anything. It never really gets to the core of it, which at the end is about how we're isolated, and we're alone, and we're just looking to survive in
Oh man,
capitalism.
absolutely. Everything you just said just really, really hit home. Like, it is this demonizing of feelings because, you know, someone like Shira Seven, she's like, it's weak to love, it's weak. And actually, anyone who's lived, like, I feel like anyone who's lived life, when they're really real with themselves, the hardest thing to do is to let yourself feel those feelings, to let yourself be vulnerable. It takes so much strength that people will do anything and everything in their power to avoid doing it. It's the highest form of strength to let yourself be vulnerable, to feel your feelings and to act on them. That's the highest strength and courage that there is. And it's beautiful. And you know, the way we don't accept them, or the way we are intimidated when somebody stirs these things in ourselves, like, you know, I to me that's indicative of a soul in pain, um and a kind of weakness that is yet to be overcome. And I've been made to feel weak and lesser, or sometimes too much and irrational, for the way I feel, for my very strong feelings, for the way I love. But now I'm like, this is my greatest gift. This is the best part of me. This is like the core of me. This shows that I'm human and that I'm full of love to offer everyone, including myself, you know? And it's been quite a journey.
Yeah. And like, and we are, and you are, like, you know, and I fully agree with you. Like, I was laughing and I muted myself so I wouldn't be too loud, but I was really laughing when you were like, have you like lived life? because like, and I do, and honestly, like Jen, you are someone that I really admire for the ways that like like I think we should all have like a quote unquote like hopeless romantic in us. Not in terms of like it drives us like crazy if we don't find that, but just in terms of like the not giving up, like the not giving up on love, like the not giving up on uh because I mean I think that's something that like when we're in prayer or like we talk a lot about like this way is hard, especially when I hear people who are like sober and like years sober, and like whether we're in ceremony or whatever, they're just like this way is hard, like this way is hard, like, and they acknowledge that, and they acknowledge that it is incredibly tough, and it can be hard, and it can even kind of like break us and hollow us a little bit, but it's also beautiful, like it's also a very beautiful way to live, and we deserve to have that, we deserve to have that beauty, we deserve to have the healthy like relationships. And I mean, I'm just thinking as when like especially when I think about Palestine, that's been a personal gauge. I've noticed like because I'll be like honest, like I've been down bad like emotionally, mentally, for it feels like a while, but when I think about Palestine, oh no, did we just lose? Okay, good. When I think about Palestine, like that was a gauge of a meter for me. Like I was numb. I was so numb. Like I was not allowing myself to feel the things, or I was trying to just make sense of it. And um, I realized, like, as a man, I feel like something that I need to constantly do is a lot of unlearning and a lot of checking in and making sure that um, I'm not bottling, and just not even like that men do this. I know that a lot of other people do, but just like the bottling of feelings. I've always been a bottler. I've always been someone that pushes them down until like they come popping out, and historically, and like for me it's been not good when I stuff things down. So something that I'm like working on is, yeah, kind of like what you're saying, like it's okay to have these feelings, it's okay to have big feelings. And I think a lot of times people are taught, like I know a relative who was taught that their feelings hurt people, like that the things they're feeling could actually hurt and kill somebody that they love, and that if they don't control their feelings, if they don't control themselves. And it's like, well, it's not feelings. Like feelings should be shared by people. Like there's people with empathy, and but
And not to mention that, you know colonization and occupation have basically destroyed so many people. Like, I mean, and we're the children of them. And so like the repairing and the healing is it's what's necessary to understand, and love is in that way integrated into that. Like, oh yeah, I was going to talk about this analogy um, that comes from like people when they talk about traditional medicine, they talk about the difference between taking like a tea from a plant, rather than a pill. And a pill, even though it is a chemical, just like the chemicals in the plant, comes like as like alone. It's just a chemical, like, in a lab, taken apart from the other different ingredients and aspects of the plant. And so when you take it without all that, and you take it sort of as to treat something, like specifically. And but all the other elements of the plant are disregarded as not important. And so traditional medicine is about that holistic integration. So like the plant has everything in it to do what it needs to do. And so when you take it in, it's healthy that way. It's not triggering your stomach to deal with that particular chemical element, and it's isolated from everything else, and therefore contributing to other diseases later on. So what I'm trying to get at is that love should be integrated like that, should be about integrating, as plants, when we take them in, work and function. So it should never just be about yourself or how you want to be loved, but rather how the community needs love and what is it lacking. And I think it was coming from thinking about trauma and mental disease and things that have to do with something that's always historically harder to understand and harder to deal with. And of course, this other notion of love as the cure for all. It's another lie, right? Because it's almost like, oh, all you have to do is love, or love is the only thing you need. But that's also very very much misconstruing love, because love is all these actions that are needed in order for all of us to heal together. So it's not just one thing, but it is healthy. So like it should look for towards health. So but health as this integrated, um, of many different things that involve our bodies, our socialization, our families, our groups of friends, and everything else that encompasses a good life. So all of our other kinds of love that are not partner love, like brotherhood, sisterhood, with more than human beings, and spirituality, like that's health to me. And I understand it as very loving that way, but it does not mean that it's not painful, that is easy. And in that way is definitely not just a pill that you take, or something that you can just go purchase. uh, Rather it's something that is alive, and it's a relationship, and you need to build on it, and you need to work on it. And I think that that's the hardest part right now, when you see a generation that is not willing necessarily to give much opportunity for love, which is where I think you were drawing from. And it because doesn't want to be vulnerable, or doesn't want to feel something that's painful. And so I think that's, yeah, I don't want to like keep going in loops. I'm just saying that it really is about digging deeper into all those spaces that are not easy to understand or to deal with. And that's why we need each other to do so. And of course it's better to have instances such as counseling and that kind of thing. But I'm thinking it's a community of love, not just one love.
I think that I mean, you speaking to like kind of like the pseudo, or like the everything you said just made me think about how the basis from which we approach love is is not only based in like guilt or insecurity, it's like kind of based in self-hatred, right? It's like it's like an alternative to actually learning how to love yourself. And like I personally like grapple with that all the time. I'm constantly looking to other people for validation, and like I'm like I need to bounce my ideas and thoughts off someone else so I know that I'm not crazy, or so maybe they could help me understand things. And like of course those conversations are always going to be so important and necessary, but I guess this is just to say that romantic love is kind of framed as the alternative to true self-love, and that individualism is framed as the alternative to true self-love. And it's sad because like it's it's marketed to people as self-love, but it's quite the opposite. It's quite the opposite. And that's just the thing about capitalism, right? Is um always with the contradictions, and always with just the topsy turvy, literally backward society. Like
Yeah, it's so. I'm thinking about what you said, especially about because I think it's true. I think we do, especially when we talk about like partnership or couple, like the couple gets a lot of play in settler society. Like the couple, um, it gets a lot of play when it comes to like, I mean, social events. I mean, we see um like the idea of like you becoming professional and then having a wife or a husband, and then you taking this person to like we like the galas or like the business meetings, right? Or like the couple gets a lot of play, whether it's like financial access to stuff like by coupling people. And this is something that um like historically, like in our communities never got as much like capital or never got as much like clout, because we did have these extended um, networks. And um, so that when if you build families off of this idea of like romantic love, of lifelong, one and only, and a lot of people do tend to like project their insecurities or find or use it as a blanket. Like I've experienced this just in my own life, where I've had a like a partner where I ended up feeling like a security blanket. Like, there's a balance between like sharing emotions, validating people, holding space for feelings. And then it got to a certain point where I didn't know how to describe it other than I just felt like, like those weighted security blankets that like people with anxiety and stuff use. Like that's kind of how I had communicated to her that I felt like I wasn't really being seen, or that I wasn't being held in the way that maybe once we had, but that I was just somebody there to like weigh down and to reassure. And I think that like when we talk about codependency, when we talk about um, the ways that people have been taught to be together, um, we highlight some of these things. We highlight like, oh, like, well, he doesn't care about you unless he gets jealous, or he doesn't care about you unless he like enacts on his jealousy, or they don't like if like even extended to like where people like normalize like abuse or normalize like mistreatment in relationships, and we dub these as signs of affection or signs of love. And I find myself wondering a lot what um and looking to places like what is love like without all those influences. Like what is love, like what is a decolonial love, like what would it look like to acknowledge that these things have happened and this is where we're at, and not a moving back. um I think a lot what Mika had mentioned, and we'll talk more about this hopefully on the parenting episode, but she said something like, black and descendants of the transatlantic slave trade, like they're trying to do something in terms of parenting that has never been done on this hemisphere, like in terms of like their relations and their histories, like they don't have that connectingness. And I think about like we are trying to do something that hasn't been done. We're trying to figure out what it means to love ourselves and to love each other in ways that are deeper, in ways that lead to unity after having like an apocalypse visited upon us. Like we're living in a post-apocalyptic society where, um, and if you think about like all the apocalypse movies, like I can't really think of any that are a love story. I think the closest one that I can think of maybe that I've seen is The Road with I think it's actually about Cormac McCarthy. I can't remember his name, but it's about a father and a son, and they're like traveling on the road.
The Last of
Oh,
Us.
the last. Oh yeah,
But it's
you're
about
right. What the heck?
parental
I forgot
love,
about that. Yeah, The Last of Us. No, that's a love story as well. Yeah.
which is where I wanted to wrap up this podcast actually. Parental love. It literally is the fabric of our society. Sorry, I don't want to cut you off either, Levi. Did you finish that thought? So a lot of tribes in North America, probably all over, right, have prophecies about the end of times. And a common thread amongst a lot of those prophecies is, and again, this is just like a material analysis, is that when we're approaching the end of times, um, the little children will be mistreated and they'll be unhappy. And like the heart of a broken child is like a child with a broken heart, just one, is a devastating thing, right? People are moved by everything we're seeing coming out of Gaza, right? And that profound mistreatment of children. Half of the population of Gaza are children. Children. That's who we're bombing, children, right? Or that's who the US is bombing, right? Like, and I think that if there were ever a time to really think about what that means, think about what these prophecies means, and to think about the suffering of children and the love of children and the insight they have to show us about the state of the world it's now, right? And so thinking about the power of parental love as literally a future making process is something that's on my mind. And you both are parents and have wonderful things to share about your experiences. But I've also, y'all have given me insight. Like I've felt taken care of by both of you on various occasions. And I believe it is because of your particular insight as parents. So I would just love for y'all to like expand on that and expand on these thoughts.
Yeah. I appreciate you. I appreciate you saying that. Um, and yeah, as I hear it with like a lot of threads with parents, it's my journey with like parenthood, like parental love that I have had to work through a lot, like, and that it's called me to it's radicalized my politics even further. It's pushed me to places of deeper caring. I mean, when I look at like like baby llama over the young black Palestinian girl that has like her interviews and stuff like that, like I have a friend who shares her stuff a lot, and she reminds me so much of my own daughter. Like I just like I'm trying to imagine what it would be like to be a parent over there. And I mean, even before what's happening right now in Gaza, uh, I still think like we are in those end times. Like how like you could go back 100 years and say the same thing. You could go back to Contact and see that the way they treated their children, um, like the labor, the just the general attitudes. And there's a paper that I remember reading in undergrad. It's actually in, I think, Decolonizing Native American Rhetoric. It's like the Battle of Greasy Grass, like a gendered and sexed circumference of memory, and it's basically taking the Battle of Greasy Grass, the Battle of Little Bighorn, um, and in American, uh, like in American history, American history, and essentially like history in general for the West, is conflict to conflict to conflict, war to war to war. Like, that's how they tell the story. That's how they tell their story. Um, and so it's reframing the Battle of Little Greasy Grass not from the perspective of a battle, but from the perspective of a village. Like this is a place where women and mothers and aunties and children like lived. Like, and it talks about how a lot of our stories and stuff, they get um like American masculinized or like historicized through like this lens of violence. And it's like taking this monumentous, occasion and victory for us, and just looking at it from a perspective like this is where women and children and like people lived. Like this was a village. This wasn't just a battle, right? So I don't know. I think about my journey as a parent, and I've had some really hard missteps. I've missed the mark on a lot of occasions, and I am, particularly with our oldest, you know, I I realized at a certain time that the way that I was hard on him is the way that I was had people being hard on me when I was that time, because I first met him when he was about 6 or 7. And so I had to really do like that self work. I had to like talk about these things. And he's such a blessing, and he's so sweet and so kind, and his mother did such a good job with him that just by letting him and nurturing those emotionality parts, and the fact that he can like look to me today and just tell me that he loves me and tell me that like he forgives me and he knows, and we talk and we have really, and like the thing with my kids is I'm always very honest with my kids. I don't believe in lying to them. I believe in saying things that I think are true in a ways that they can understand, and because I want them to do that. I want them to be able to speak truth. I want him to be able to go to school and, ask questions like that need to be asked. And, so yeah, I, it's pushed me, and it's continually pushing me, and it's continually pushing me to like widen my scope in terms of what it means to be a parent and what it means to take care of kids in the way that I want to liberate children, in the way that I want, I don't just want to be able to not send my kid to public school. I want to be able to dismantle or reshape, and I'm not going to say reform because that carries, but just to reshape like what we think of when we think about childcare and education and bringing our kids. I never want to be away from my kids. Like that's like the type of future that I want to fight for, and that's the type of future that I think all parents deserve. Like I think they should be with us. They're with us all the time. Like there was not a moment where they were separate in a different place, a different table, a different, like, they were with us all the time. So, I would love to be able to get back to that.
It's true. And thank you for that question, Jen, because yeah, I think being a woman and being of this, generation of different feminisms, I think one of uh, the most misconstrued or confused sometimes takes on feminism is when there is this notion of women being able to decide not to be mothers, decide not to parent, and it's sometimes demonized as well, right? um, of course it has to do with the culture that you are a mother in, and as it was said previously about Palestine and surviving genocide, um, being a parent and being a mother, um, coming from that experience, it's it's life affirming, is the revolution, is the way to be. You have to pass on life, you have to be a mother, you have to remain, your culture, your whole being is attached to your community, so you have to have kids, you have to be a mother. So like in terms of like how freeing that kind of love is, um I think that's another myth. I think the love you can have for your child is at the same time that it is the most life affirming, is also the one that gives you the possibility to arrive to a place where you can see your own death. And what I mean by that is that you love so much. I mean, it's the biggest love, and that's why it's also the beginning of your death. You know what I mean? Like because you're passing on life. So many times it's about working on you so that whatever obstacles you haven't dealt with do not become their obstacles. um, it has to do with understanding the possibility for you to be reborn through them, and correct mistakes that maybe your parents weren't able to avoid by parenting you. So it's a lot of breaking heart, all the time. The Being a parent is like the moment you understand one phase in their growth, they're already in the next one and you're starting all over. So I used to tell my son, um, every day is an opportunity to be a better mom to you, because every day I mess up. Like every day I don't get it. So uh, that's why it's like the closest, I think, the closest thing to understanding your limits, but also your power. And one thing I love about the love of children, the one they give us, is that they're always showing you, um, how easy it is to let go. Like, for example, if they fall and they hurt, and they're little, and they cry so hard, like they feel it, right? Like it's the end of the world. That moment is the end of the world. But they have that elasticity to the next minute they're laughing just as hard. And and that, to me, it's the biggest lesson that children give you, is to just let go, like you go through the feeling, let the feeling, let you give you its teachings. But life goes. It's a moment, so use it, love hard, fall again, mess up, like, because you can just jump right back, like. And yeah, when we're young, we're like almost made of rubber, most things don't hurt that much, and as you get older, they do hurt more. But to me, that's the most beautiful gift that they can give you, is the possibility to see yourself healing through the inspiration of their love and the love that they inspire in you. So I think that's why they are the heart of a community. And it's very true, a community that does not care about their children, it's probably a community that is in demise. And that's the hard lesson of today, in terms of a, a, a civilization, I would say, because I don't think there's enough time that people spend with children, or they're not a priority. A lot of people, and it's not about people deciding not to have kids. I think it's more about not believing in the hope they bring. And so, that's really tough. It's a really tough thing about our times. So is having children is, like I said, like, it is the revolution of betting for life. So we children that way allow you to feel the deepest, greatest love. But it's not, of course, the only way either. I find myself around a lot of women that they don't have children yet, they have the most maternal love towards their community. And so that shows you that it's not just about the physical act of having children, but about the elasticity or flexibility to feel that love that is all given and that is selfless. um, but that requires you to really love yourself, because you can't really love if you don't love yourself. Like, like, it becomes something sort of toxic if you're not giving it to yourself. It's more like an expectation from the other, like, I give you, so you give me back. And with children, you don't. It's like it's all for them. It's for their path, it's for their. um I found myself being a mom younger than I didn't plan to be a mom so young. But I decided most of the things, like the degree that I was studying, the topic that I was studying, everything that I was going through at that time, I decided thinking of my finitude, like, wow, how could I serve them? Because it was suddenly not just about me. Like, that whole shift just happened. Like, I was no longer just me, so um that's important to always keep in mind, that you can only parent, if you have taken care of your own well-being, your own struggles. Otherwise, you just pass it on to them. It's just almost like you give them your own trauma.
Yeah.
And so that's a difficult one. And yeah, I've
Well,
talked too much.
no, you talked perfect amount. Um,
Oh,
and but with something you said about like the self love that I kind of do want to touch on, like especially before we end, is I think there is like we bash on like individualized like notions of like self care and self community, but there is something to be said about self love, like especially as you were talking about that, like because there's elements where it's like it is true, like we have to love ourselves if we want to love others, and we have to embody that self love that we're willing to get from others, to And especially I think about it a lot like this, when someone had told me that the voice that we have in our head oftentimes is not our own. Like you're not the voice in your head, like you're the one who hears it. And that the voice in your head is often the voices of those who raised us. And if, whether it's our parents directly, or whether it's the dominant culture, it's the rhetoric and the narratives that we've heard from colonial settler colonial culture, or white supremacist culture, or patriarchal culture, like so it's about, like, we're not the one, like, you're not the voice in your head, you're the one who hears it. So what does that mean? That means that we can, self-love to me, and when it comes to parenting especially, is making sure that I'm doing the work to re to reteach the voice in my head, or to try to shift it in a way, whether that's like very intentional, like mirror work, like you wake up, in the morning, you get your water, like you say thank you, you bless your water, you thank it, like you talk to yourself, something that my uncle always says, that when we're just out and about, or in ceremonies or whatever, in groups of people, he always is like, in case no one's ever told you today, he's like, I love you. I love each and every one of you. He's like, I tell myself that in the mirror, when I wake up. And, uh, so when we talk about like doing that and trying to retrain that voice in our head, I'm also thinking about that I will be the voice in my kid's head. Like and I want to make sure that, and we do make mistakes. Like, I make mistakes all the time. And I really like what you said, Maida, about every day is a new opportunity to be a better parent, to be a better dad. Like, um, because sometimes the mistakes, and I dwell on them personally. Like, I'm trying to learn to let go, as you were talking about, so, but I'm a person who naturally, I'm a person who cringes at stuff I did in middle school. Like, I'll like, you're in bed minding my own business, and something I said or did in middle school will come up, and I'm just like, all right, well, I'm not going to sleep now. Like, that's the kind of person that that I that happen that that's what happens to me. So, bet that I'm lamenting and thinking and wishing, but I really like that forward, focused, and that we will have another chance to correct these things, and that we will have another opportunity to wake up, because that's like what I believe, like, just life, like spiritually, like just living life, like, it's bigger than spiritual. It's just like how we live. Like, every day we have a new chance. Every day, is a blessing. Like, when we wake up, when we breathe, when so
Thank
um
you both. And Levi, what you're saying, about mirror work, I've never heard that term, but what you described last night, me and my sister, we were talking about love, and we started talking about self-love, and we talked about this distinct experience that I actually haven't even talked about it with a lot of people, but like I'm sure a lot of people can relate, but it's a distinct Pueblo woman experience where sometimes for some ceremonies we can't look in mirrors for very extended periods of time. And there's this moment when you finally do, uh, uncover the mirror and you look at yourself after working hard, going through something difficult. You're physically tired, you're emotionally and spiritually tired. But there's just something special about that moment when you do see yourself again and you're in this altered state of mind. You're in a kind of different place and you're just like, oh my God, I'm so beautiful. Like, why did I think otherwise? Like, how dare I be ungrateful? Like, and it's just like, it's, and nothing really compares to that. You kind of, after extending so much of yourself to others and getting this opportunity to love in a hard way, right? And thinking about how in our ways of life, love and suffering are like co-constitutive a lot of the times. Loving your community involves that sacrifice. And so that moment when you get to see yourself again, you see yourself almost like in your purest form, it feels like. And there's just something so profound about it. And so today I've been feeling grateful, kind of ruminating on that bit that she left me with. And like, I think that in order for us to find self love, like, we need to be willing to take it in from the people around us so we can extend it back out. And is that not how energy in general works and regenerates itself? Again, not any hoo-hoo stuff, like literally just observe the observable nature of the universe, right? Like, but I think that's kind of my final thought. Um, love doesn't exist in isolation ever. Not the most personal kinds of love, not the most intimate kinds of love. It's all connected. And I just feel really grateful to be in community with people like you and the Red Nation, because y'all have saved my life many times over.
Thank you. Thank you for this space.
Yeah, for real.